Chapter 34. The subway ride home was a blur. Sierra tried to explain the gist of her encounter with Lucera, but her heart wasn't in it. Juan sat with his mouth gaping open at the thought that their grandmother had been Lucera all this time without telling him, and Sierra was too tired and afraid to throw the irony in his face. Benny and T gave a play-by-play of what had happened back on the shore. Robbie had tried to go after Sierra when she took off, but more corpuscles had come out and surrounded him. Juan said at least 4 of them had been caught in the colorful web of his tattoos before they finally grabbed Robbie and ran off with him. T had tried to sneak after them to see where they were headed, but they disappeared quickly into the darkness of Coney Island. It had all happened so fast, and the shadows had swept in from the beach just a few minutes later, too late to help Robbie. T shook her head. "I'm so sorry, Sierra." Sierra gave a half-hearted, "Don't be." And then everyone fell into a gloomy silence as the Q train rumbled toward Prospect Park. "Juan," Sierra said as she and her brother walked up Lafayette Avenue toward their house. "Do you remember anything at all that could help us figure out where Wick might have taken Robbie?" Juan shrugged. "I don't know, sis. I'm still reeling from the fact that Mama Carmen was a part of this all along and no one told me." Now you know how I feel." "Fair point." Sierra was getting impatient. Robbie could be a corpuscle already. What if someone is helping Wick? Another Shadowshaper, maybe. I mean, who would do that? Most of the Shadowshapers don't shape anymore. Otherwise, I'd say we should track them down to help us. Even the ones that do, I wouldn't know where to look for them. And I don't think we have time for all that anyway. They walked up the front steps. Sierra stopped Juan from opening the door. "What?" Juan demanded. "I need you to think, Juan." "I am thinking." "Were there any of the Shapers that struck you as weird or off?" "Not that I remember." "Any that seemed jealous of Abuelo?" "How are you so sure it was a Shadowshaper, Sierra? Could have been one of your friends helping Wick." Sierra opened her mouth to argue and then closed it again. Juan had a point. "Think about it," Juan said. He opened the front door and walked in. "Did anyone else know you were heading out to Coney Island?" Sierra growled and followed him inside. "What's up, youngins?" Uncle Neville sat at the kitchen table, his long legs stretched out in front of him, a cup of steaming coffee in his hand. "How the night treating you?" Sierra had no answer for that. Grandpa Lazaro's heavy, impossible presence seemed to cast a shadow on her all the way from the 4th floor. She stormed up to his apartment. A slew of furious demands, accusations, and complaints for him burned on the edge of her tongue. But when she opened the door, Lazaro slept peacefully, splayed out across the bed. She shook her head and marched past him to the photographs. Sierra gasped. More than half of the faces had been smudged out now. Manny's, of course, and Raconteur, and old Vernon, along with 4 other guys Sierra didn't know. Besides Papa Acevedo, the only Shadowshapers left unsmudged were Caleb Jones, a tall, light-skinned guy in his 30s with a bright red fro and tattoos creeping up his neck. Theodore Crane, a shriveled-up old man with his arms crossed over his chest. Delmon Alcatraz, and Sonny Balboa, the 2 guys who ran the barbershop over on Marcy, and a thick, frowning guy in a tracksuit and Stetson hat named Francis True. None of this helped. If someone was helping Wick, it could be one of the surviving Shadowshapers, but how would she find out which one? Sierra shot one last angry look at her grandfather and went downstairs to her room. She didn't know what to pack. Didn't even know where she was going. All she knew was that she had to get out of the house and start looking for Robbie. She started putting random things into her courier bag. A flashlight, batteries, some rope. A vague notion began swimming through her mind. An answer. She couldn't put her finger on it yet, but it was there. It was there, and it was uncomfortable. Something that was throwing off everything else in her calculations. Someone who knew about Sierra's every move. Why? Because every time she made one, no matter where she went, those corpuscles were there, waiting. Like there was an all-seeing eye glaring at her from above. Or a spy. A spy. Sierra! Her mom's voice was still grating from 3 floors away. ¿Dónde estás, mija? Someone she trusted. Aquí, arriba! Sierra called, not bothering to hide the irritation in her voice. She sat at her desk and rubbed her face. Tension pulsed angrily through her tired body. The answer was flirting with her, staying just out of her mind's eye, but making itself known around the edges. Maria Santiago's footsteps came up the creaking stairs. Sierra wanted the answer to show up before her mom did. Sierra. A gentle tap-tap. Maria always started extra meek when she was really upset about something. It had been years since the technique had thrown Sierra off guard, but it was still unnerving. Maria eased open the door and poked her head in. She looked exhausted. What's going on, baby? Can you talk to me, please? She walked in and stood at the foot of the bed, looking like she didn't know what to do with her hands. You're going and coming at all kinds of strange hours. You're yelling at Rosa? You're not yourself, mija. Sierra stared into her mom's dark, severe eyes. It's... None of the possible lies made any sense. I can't talk about it. Sierra, are you taking drugs? Mom! Sierra slammed her fist on the desk, maybe a little harder than she'd meant to. I said I don't want to talk about it. You keep pressing the issue. Sound familiar? How do you like being on the other side? I'm learning from my elders how to be nice and quiet when the situation calls for it. Maria's exhaustion turned quickly to anger. How dare you pull attitude with me right now, with all that's going on? How dare I? How dare I? The dam that had been holding back Sierra's rage collapsed. She stood up so forcefully, the chair almost fell backward behind her. You've been keeping things from me about my own family for my entire life. How dare you? Sierra. Maria switched into wise old mother mode. Now is not the time to get into all that. Now is exactly the time to get into it. You think if you don't talk about something, it just goes away? You think you were... Sierra felt herself swinging dangerously close to tears and slowed her breathing, keeping an icy stare on her mom. You think you were protecting us? Well, look where that got us. Manny? Robbie? She couldn't find the words to explain without breaking down. What did you want me to say? Maria yelled. That your abuelos were crazy magicians? That they thought they could communicate with the dead? Es una locura, Sierra. Family eccentricities. It has nothing to do with you. Nothing to... It's insanity. Sierra realized her hands had been trembling, clenched in tight fists. She relaxed them. She had thinking to do. The possibility of someone helping Wick still danced just out of sight. It was time to go. She took her bag and walked calmly toward the door. Maria exploded into a fury. Don't you dare walk out on me, Sierra Maria Santiago! Sierra turned suddenly, catching her mother off guard. You want to know how I know that you believe in our power more than anyone? I can see the terror in your eyes. You're afraid. You've been scared since I mentioned it. You're afraid of me finding things out. But more than that, you're still terrified of your own parents. Because you know they were powerful. You know they had it, that magic. And you see it. In me. Don't you, Mommy? And it terrifies you. Maria's eyes were wide and watery. She must have been working hard for years to convince herself that both her parents were completely insane, Sierra realized. She must have fought to believe that she was a normal person, just like everyone else, and not a gifted spiritist linked to a legacy of magic. And you know what else? Sierra continued. I know you got it too. You got that magic touch, Mommy. But you're too afraid to use it. Too afraid that the other teachers at your school or Tia Rosa might find out. Or that it'd be more power than you knew what to do with. That's probably it. You're afraid of your own power. Sierra was sniffling, but she refused to let the tears out. Her jaw was set, her eyes narrow. Well, I'm not afraid, Mommy. I'm not scared of my power. I'm not ashamed of what I got. Not ashamed of my history. And I'm not ashamed of Abuela. You hear me? Ever so slightly, Maria Santiago nodded. For a second, Sierra thought her mom might shatter into a million pieces, right then and there. A door opened in the hallway above them, and Timothy poked his head over the banister. You, want me to call the police? No, Sierra and her mom yelled at the same time. Something in Maria's eyes relented. Tears still teased their edges, but they held a peacefulness that hadn't been there before. Sierra turned and started down the stairs. She felt like she'd lost about 20 pounds just by speaking. She walked out into the hallway. The answer was coming. She was sure of it. Wick had known they'd be at Coney Island. That meant someone had to have... She froze in her tracks on the second-floor landing. In her mind's eye, she saw or felt a flurry of movement, a shadow that flickered away just before she could see it. Besides her friends and Juan, only one other person knew she was going to Coney Island. Sierra's feet barely touched the steps as she raced down them. Neville! Her godfather smiled up from his coffee mug. Sierra, I thought you were turning in, girl. Neville, can you be that cool godfather that does his goddaughter a solid without asking too many questions? Conspicuous and ridiculous are my middle names. You mind giving me a ride uptown again? Neville's grin got bigger. You know I love an adventure.